got diagnosed with autism on the NHS 2.5 years ago, and I'm going to go through all of the tips that I have for going for your assessment. Now, just to cover the first base that I'm worried that people will think, these aren't tips to get an autism diagnosis. These are tips for your assessment. Obviously, there is this narrative in the media at the minute that everybody's autistic and everybody wants to be autistic. So this isn't me sitting you down and being like, this is how to get your diagnosis so you can be autistic. This is for people who are on the waiting list, waiting for their assessment, genuinely think they might be autistic, and tips to just help with the assessment in general. This is not me sitting you down and going, this is what you need to say to get your diagnosis. This is just tips for the actual assessment. I do have a full video going through my assessment and my referral process. I will leave that above. That breaks down more in detail of how I got on the assessment list, how long it took, and then what actually happened on my assessment day. So if you are looking for details as to how your assessment is going to go, if you want to know how my assessment went, go watch that video, because that will give a much more detailed breakdown of the order of the day and how the assessment went and things like that. These tips are going to range from before your assessment to the actual assessment day. So we'll try and go in chronological order. So the first tip that I have, and it is my biggest tip that I have, is to have a note on your phone, and every time you realize that a trait that you have or an issue that you have, symptom or a sign that you have autism, write it down. I had it on my phone because it meant that anywhere that I was, it means I could write it down. And I think if you are going through the process of getting diagnosed, you'll probably know that the majority of the time, we don't realize that things are our autism. So I would say have that note for when you find out that something is a trait through social media, through other autistic people, through friends and family, anything like that. If you think that it could be related to your autism, write it down. It doesn't have to be a definite thing, but if you think it could relate, write it down. And then the next tip that I have is when it comes to your assessment, write that down in a huge Word doc and send it to them. The likelihood is that you are going to be sent questionnaires before your assessment. They may come months before, they may come weeks before, they may already have been sent with your referral. You probably will get further questionnaires. When you send in those questionnaires, send this document that has all of the things that you think could be related to the autism. I went a step further and then categorized them into the DSM-5 categories that you need for an autism diagnosis, but you don't have to do that. They'll know where it fits. Speaking of your questionnaires, let your detail-oriented mind go to work. Answer them in as much detail as you possibly can. And if you have evidence of any of those things, attach it. Put it on. Which leads me to another point, is ask if you can send it digitally. I got sent my letters in the post. There was no way I was going to be able to write everything that I wanted in the tiny little text box that it comes with. I wrote everything up digitally and sent it across. And if you do that, it means that you can also attach evidence to it, like see evidence point B, like that type of thing. All I did was email my assessment centre and ask if I could send it through email, and they said absolutely. So then I wrote all of the questions in a Word doc and then answered it below. But answering it as much detail as you possibly can. I feel like with this kind of stuff, there is no such thing as too much detail. Let your autistic brain do its autistic thing. Kind of related to that, but also related to the assessment, is if you haven't already, talk to people who were around you when you were a child. That can be anyone. It does not have to be parents, but talk to them about your traits. Your childhood is going to be talked about. It's going to be talked about. So I found it quite enlightening when I sat down with my grandma. I went through the questionnaire with her and I was just like, look, can you just answer these questions for me? And I found it quite enlightening how many autistic traits I had in childhood that I didn't even remember and I didn't know about, because you're going to be too young to remember stuff. So I found out that I actually did tiptoe walk when I was younger. I had no idea that I did that. And there's probably going to be things like that that would be really useful to tell your assessor. So if you haven't already, just talk to anybody who was there when you were a child. Obviously that's not possible for everyone, and that's fine. I was really anxious going into it that I wasn't going to be able to do this as well. But if you don't have anyone to talk to, that's not your fault. It doesn't matter. But if you can, talk to any person who might have known you when you were a child. Okay, moving on to the actual appointment. The first point for that is to take off as much time as you possibly can. And I mean that for whatever you are doing. If you can only take off an hour, that's fine. But take off as much as you can. I'm not gonna lie, it is a little bit tiring. You are basically sitting and answering questions about your entire life, and in an unfamiliar environment with an unfamiliar person, it is tiring. So I would take as much time off before as you can to relax, and I would take off as much time as you can after. Like I say, just as much as you are able to give. Obviously, I understand that not everybody can take time off, so just do as much as you can. But that leads me to the next point. Before the appointment, do anything you can that you count as rest. So that could be anything. Whatever you count as restful, do it. If being productive counts as restful for you, be productive. Do whatever you can before your appointment so that you know that you are going to be able to talk for about 2 hours to somebody. The last thing that you want is to go non-verbal when you get to your appointment, and then it might not go the way that as an adult assessment would optimally go. So do whatever you can. Obviously, if you've got a 9 a.m. appointment, you're probably going to be sleeping, but just leading up to the appointment, try and make sure that you are not going to be non-verbal. If you're going to be burnt out, you're going to be burnt out. It might it might help to show that to the people, but do whatever you count as rest. The next one is prepare for any outcome. So that could be amazing, you get it, brilliant, you get your diagnosis, prepare for what you want to do after that. And that actually is my next point, is if you have anyone you would like to celebrate with, ask if they can take some time off after I got my diagnosis from my first assessment. I actually got it halfway through. After I got my diagnosis, I wanted to celebrate. I wanted to tell everybody. I wanted to go out into the world and be like, I'm autistic. Like, I wanted to tell everyone, and I am very grateful that I had my partner there to celebrate with after. So if you have anybody that you would like to celebrate with, ask if they can have some time. Maybe don't book anything in. So say if you were like, oh, we'll go out for a meal, maybe don't have that booked in case you don't get it and it's a bit disappointing, and then you're just like, nah, what are we going to do about the meal now? But it also goes the other way. If you have anybody that you think you would need support from, ask if they can have time with you. Ask if they can have time off if you need them to take time off work. When I say prepare for any outcome, prepare for any outcome. There are many different ways it could go through the assessment. You could get it, you could not get it, you could be told you're not autistic. You need to prepare for that. Regardless of whether you are or not autistic, you have went into this with traits that look like autism. So being told that you are not autistic is going to be hard. So prepare for that. Prepare for being told that you have to have a few more appointments. Prepare for any outcome so that afterwards it doesn't have to be a big thought process, because you're probably going to be a little bit tired. My next bit of advice would be to wear the comfiest clothes that you own, and I feel like that is a given. I feel like the majority of the time we do wear the comfiest clothes that we own. But the reason that I'm saying this is actually my clothes got picked up on in my assessment. So I am somebody who wears a lot of baggy clothes. I actually switched. With autistic people, we tend to go either way. We tend to wear either really, really tight clothes all the time, or we wear really, really baggy clothes all the time. Now, obviously, there's exceptions to that rule, but you know what I mean. And I wore baggy clothes, and it actually got picked up on, being like, is that typical of what you wear? Do you wear baggy clothes all the time? And I was like, yes. Wear what your comfiest clothes are, so that you are comfortable, so you don't have to worry about your clothing. But also, it might show a little bit more of autistic traits if you are somebody who gravitates towards those two things. Penultimate thing is, don't be scared to ask for accommodations. This is the perfect place to do it. If there is anywhere that you are going to ask for accommodations before you get your diagnosis, it's going to be your assessment, and they are going to be understanding because they know autism. I didn't really think about this going into it. I went into this thinking about every other doctor's appointment where I have to mask, I have to put up with things that I don't particularly like. And I went into the room and she straight away asked me if I wanted the lights off, and I was like, yes, please. And that made me feel so happy that I was allowed to have the lights off. So have that going into it. If you go in and it's super bright, ask if you can have the lights off. Obviously, that is also going to help showing that you need to have accommodations. So if you have anything in mind, like the lights, the volume, if there's something that is in the room and you don't like, if there's a material that you have to sit on, like on the chair, and you don't like it, say something, tell them. If there's anywhere to do it, it is in your autism assessment. Okay, last one. I think this applies to a lot of different assessment procedures, but when you are answering questions about your autistic traits, think about your worst day. And that isn't going to apply to all the questions. A lot of these questions are going to be about your childhood. It's going to be about typically, but think about your worst week with your autism. Now, obviously, I am not saying lie. If your worst week is only happening 1 week out of the 52 weeks of the year, then okay, don't exaggerate. But I would definitely say don't go into this being like, well, because we do this is what happens when you're debating whether you have autism and you take things literally. Don't go into it going, well, actually, for 4 out of the 3 days that I actually am okay with every single noise in the world, so I don't have a problem with noises. That's not what they're asking. Think about your worst day and how it applies to the question. If any of your autistic traits relate to that question, bring them up. Don't take it, obviously we are going to take everything literally, but really try to listen to the questions you're being asked and see if your autism can relate to any of it. And I feel like that brings up a point that I have for just tip in general, and that is research this, but I am honestly just assuming that you've already done that because I think the majority of us do. But just research autism, research what the traits are, research people's experiences relating to your gender or the gender you were brought up in. Really look into the disorder, because there are so many things that I had no idea. How old was I? I was 25 when I got my diagnosis, and when I first got my referral, I was like, no, I'm not autistic. I am. I just had no idea what autism was and what traits were associated with autism outside of the stereotypical view that the media puts on show. So really research it. Be on TikTok researching it. Look in psychology books. Talk to people. Like, there is no amount of researching that is too much. Research it. And those were my main tips. Obviously, I feel like there are so many tips that I could give, but I did want to make sure that this was super broad, and I didn't want to go into this being like, this is how you do it and this is how. No, I went through NHS, but it's going to be different for every single person that you have. I was very, very fortunate and had a lovely assessor, but unfortunately that's not the case for everyone. But I will say my assessment went incredible, so there's no reason that yours might not. There are horror stories out there, 100%, and I know I am one of the lucky ones to have got a great assessor, but I got one. That means that you could too. So don't go into this feeling really, really negative and really, really scared. Just go into it prepared for any outcome. But I wish you the best of luck with your assessment. I hope you get what you need from it. If you have already went through your assessment and you have any tips that you would give to people, please leave them down below. Obviously, please keep them quite general, but I like making my videos a little bit of a resource center. So if you have any tips, please leave them. I do have quite a lot of autism content on my channel. I have a playlist, so I will leave that above, and it will be at the end of the video. So if you have any questions about anything, check out what videos I've already put out, because there is quite a few, but also feel free to leave any questions and I will reply. But I hope you found that video useful. If you did, if you could please leave the video a like, a comment, share, and subscribe if you are new. Every single one of those things shows YouTube that this video was actually good, and they should show my videos to more people and the channel. And I'm trying to grow my channel, so I would really appreciate any engagement you can give. But even if you don't do any of those things, thank you so much for watching, and I shall hopefully see you in another video.